Buenos días y muchas gracias por su invitación a su congreso. Y muchas gracias a Barbara, who was extremely helpful to all of us. So, soy médico con niños discapacidades, and I'm going to talk about movement and child development in a way I hope that will be interesting to you. So I'm going to tell you, first of all, that the ways in which we think about things are probably wrong. There are problems in the way in which we think about working with children with disabilities. Second, I'm going to suggest that there are new and better ways to do things, and thinking about particularly children and families, and thinking about development and functioning. There are new ideas, and many people yesterday and already today have talked about the importance of trying to help people understand new ideas, because often they take a long time after they are discovered to become part of how we think, because new ideas make us nervous. So if we look back at where we've come from, we see that we have a lot of beliefs. Now, I am trained as a doctor working with children with disabilities, and we talk about rehabilitation. But rehabilitation is not the right word, because we are not trying to return children to how they functioned before they had their impairment, because we're talking about children with autism or cerebral palsy or intellectual problems who are born this way. And so we need to talk much more about promoting child development than thinking about rehabilitation. The medical model tells us that we have to make the right diagnosis and then find the right treatment. And that's a very good idea when people suddenly become unwell. If I start to have chest pain, it's important to know if it's my heart or my digestion or my anxiety that's causing me to have pain. But when we're talking about children with disabilities, the diagnosis is rarely a specific diagnosis. Cerebral palsy refers to a large group of children who have problems in motor development. It's not a specific diagnosis, and we do not have specific treatments. We also have traditionally been taught that we have to start by trying to fix the problem. And that simply doesn't work. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. We know, for example, that we can change an impairment, but that does not necessarily mean that we have a change in function. And finally, we have been taught that we have to think about normal movement. And I'm going to suggest that we stop using the word normal at all. I think it's a silly idea. How many people here are left-handed? Okay, is that normal? Well, it's just different. So this is a little bit scary because we have to think differently. So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about movement and movement development, because that's important for all children, for who they become, how they learn, what they experience, how other people experience them. I want to talk about the idea that children with cerebral palsy have limitations in their movement. That's really part of the definition. And we are trying to fix them. And I will show you that that's not a good idea. And I think we can be much more helpful if we think and act differently. And I'm going to show you some las palabras F, which I hope you will find useful. So if we talk first about movement in child development, all children, all typically developing children, move and move and move. How many people here have a child or have had a child who was once 2 years old? Huh? I don't know how you say it in Spanish, but in English we call 2-year-olds terrible. Why? Because they constantly are moving, they are constantly getting into mischief, they are constantly touching things, they are constantly doing things that we want them not to do. And we only realize how important that is when we see a child who has a problem with movement and can't do that. So children learn a lot about themselves, they learn a lot about their environment. Parents learn a lot about their children when the children can move typically. Why this is important is that we can think about children with problems in movement as being deprived. Children who can't do things are losing the opportunities for the experiences that typically developing children have. And when we talk about conditions like cerebral palsy, we talk about them as developmental disabilities, but we forget to emphasize the development part. We spend too much time emphasizing the disability part. I said that there's a problem with fixing. If you want to be a fixing person, you should be an orthopedic surgeon at a ski resort where you can fix broken ankles and broken wrists and do a really good job. But most of us, certainly in my field, don't fix very much. And I said before, and there's good evidence to support this, that even when we can change something like spasticity and range of motion of major lower limb joints in cerebral palsy, those changes do not automatically get translated into changes in function. So a change in one part of the body does not automatically lead to changes in function. And I think we have often disappointed ourselves. I think we have disappointed families when we try to fix things that aren't fixable. So the rest of my talk, I want to talk about how we can think differently. And I'm going to give you 3 ideas that we think are important. I hope that these ideas will challenge you, and at the end of the conference, at the end of my presentation and our presentations, you will all say, sí, pero, but. Because that will mean that you're thinking about these things, and you need to ask us questions, and you need to challenge us. So, how many people here know SIF? Oh, not enough. How many people use SIF in your teaching and in your clinical practice? Just a few. Okay, so this is good. Lots to learn. This international, well, so you want to know what it is, and so does this bird. What is it and why should you care? The World Health Organization's framework for health, which is for everybody, reminds us that any health condition, in this case I put cerebral palsy, but it could be Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, any condition shows us problems or has problems in body structure and function, may create difficulties with activities of the things we want to do, may limit our ability to participate in life in ways that are important to us. And we are reminded that we must pay attention to environmental factors like family and community and structure and so on. And we need to pay attention to personal factors, the things that are important to the person we're working with. Now, one thing that I've seen in Malaga already is that the environment, the physical environment, is incredibly good for people with disabilities. It's very accessible. You get down to the beach in your wheelchair, you go down the ramps, terrific. So what the ICF encourages us to do is to emphasize what people can do instead of what they cannot do. And so I'm saying, let's stop talking about fixing, let's stop talking about normality, let's stop talking about disability, and you're going to hear the same thing from Bjorn. We need to talk about development, child and family strengths, achievements, being, belonging, and becoming. These are very important ideas, and they change the way we think, they change the way we talk, they change the way we work. So this, as I said, is a framework for health for everyone. The words are not about disability, and everything is connected to everything else. So a change in one place may be associated with changes elsewhere. Not necessarily, but maybe. And as I said a minute ago, the ICF reminds us to look at what people can do instead of what they cannot do, because what they cannot do does not tell us very much about them. About 4 years ago, one of my colleagues and I wrote a paper called The F Words in Childhood Disability. I swear this is how we should think, and I'm going to show you these. This paper has been very, very popular with colleagues, but especially with families. And it's being talked about all over the world. The F words you want to know about are fitness, function, friends, family, fun, and future. And you see how they sit in the ICF framework. And so if you remember the ICF framework, you can remember las palabras, and if you remember las palabras, you can maybe build the ICF framework and see how these things are connected. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the F words and movement. So with respect to function, the ICF does not say normal function. Remember, we want to get rid of the idea of normal. It doesn't say how the movement should be done. It says that movement is important for function. And we know that children with disabilities often find their own ways of moving. And rather than stopping that, we should celebrate that and encourage it. And this includes using supported walking, like walkers, using power mobility, which allows children to explore their environment, which allows them to have control over their environment. And even though we're not fixing them, we are helping them to become able-bodied or able in their activities. One of the things that I like to talk about, and I have a terrific opportunity with a room full of physiotherapists, is to talk about W sitting. Now, this is something that many of you might get very upset about, and we can have a discussion out in the corridor after with some fighting. But this is a very comfortable way for many children with cerebral palsy to sit. There is, to my knowledge, absolutely no evidence that it is bad for children. And again, we can talk about that in the discussion. So I encourage parents to let their children W sit, and you know what I mean by sitting between their heels. It's a comfortable, safe way for children to have both their hands free and their back straight. With respect to fitness and movement, what can we do when children have problems? Bjorn's going to talk much more about this. We can find out what children want to do and help them to do that. So remember, in the ICF, down in the corner is the personal factors. What does this child want to do? What does this family like to do? And how can we find that out and help them to do those things? And the Paralympics, all you have to do is watch people who have so-called disabilities do things most of us couldn't ever dream of doing, to realize that there isn't one right way to do things. And swimming and wheelchair sports or anything else that children want to do should be encouraged. I'll let you look at this for a minute and realize how foolish this is. You have a fitness program with an escalator taking people to the fitness program. With respect to participation, when children are able to be with other children, they can engage with them in ways that are social and ways that are intellectually stimulating and so on. And when other people see a disabled child doing things, those other people see that child in a different way than just a child who can't do things. And so movement encourages or enables participation, and people then can see ability rather than disability. And there's an expression in English which says that somebody is confined to a wheelchair. Well, they're only confined when their wheelchair is broken. Think about that. So here are some children playing together, and I have permission from the mother of this boy with cerebral palsy, who happens to be W-sitting and playing with his brother and some friends. With respect to fun, again, find out what children want to do and make that possible for them. And it doesn't have to be therapy, and it doesn't have to be done normally. The developmental importance of movement is that children learn by moving, by having postures that allow them to do things like W-sitting. I don't encourage this, but it's an example of the sort of things that children do just because they can and because they want to. With respect to family, again, find out what families like to do. How can we engage a family in helping their child with a disability to be active? And very often, I make this point here, very often parents are told by doctors especially, who are very bad at this, what their children can't do and won't be able to do. And we need to turn that upside down, because doctors, and I'm one of them, are not nearly as smart as we pretend to be. And the children never listen to us anyway. So we need to encourage them to do what they know how to do. Okay, working with families. Families really like the F words. And many of the things I'm going to show you in the last few slides are examples of how families have used the F words. So this is a mother of a family. This is a family we work with who's part of our research group. And this is her way of taking the F words and putting her family pictures into them. This is her particular individual approach to the F words. Here's another example from Julie, another parent in another part of Canada who works with us. And here's her son, who, as you see, has level 5 cerebral palsy, but she and her husband are able to find ways to describe him in ways that are important to him, in ways that are important to their family. Another parent that works with us developed this F words agreement, and she this is something that you can adapt. This is her statement for her son. Her son, I want to do stuff. It may not matter if I don't do it like everyone else, and so on. So each of these words, she has set this out as a kind of credo for her son. And he takes this to school, and he takes this other places with him. And so these are just nice examples of how these ideas can fit. And this year, colleagues in Australia adopted the F words for World Cerebral Palsy Day, which was last Wednesday. And I put the Spanish version of this. We have about 15 languages now that other people have translated. And so you see función, familia, forma física, and so on. And these are just fun ways to remember what we're trying to do in encouraging development and child and family development. And this poor child has heard this talk many times. And he didn't have his coffee this morning, and he said, "Dad, that's enough." So I just want to conclude by saying that those of us who work with children and families with disabilities, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to change the way we think and talk and behave. We need to focus on child and family development. We need to remember that children with cerebral palsy and autism and intellectual disabilities all grow up and become adults with autism and cerebral palsy and intellectual disability. And so those of you who are looking for opportunities for career development, start to pay attention to young people who have developmental conditions as they become adults. Because in most places in the world, they disappear. The adult world does not understand them and their life experience, and this is a tremendous problem all over the world. So there's a career opportunity for you. And if you want more information, you can go to our website, which is CanChild. It's the only CanChild in the world, so you can find us by Googling us. And a lot of the things I've said are on the web and free. Thank you very much.